Gorbad Ironclaw is joining the Greenskins roster alongside a collection of new units. There are some powerhouse monsters, some staunch frontlines, and some in between. So let's take a look at everything new. First up, we have the main man himself, Gorbad Ironclaw. He's really just a more powerful orc war boss with stat improvements almost across the board. That means he's a strong frontlines battler with excellent armor, melee stats, and damage. He'll do well against pretty much anything and keep himself relatively healthy with a high defense stat. Alongside his own damage, he also increases the power of nearby allied units, meaning placing him in the middle of your lines is a great way to get a huge boost in melee power. As for his mounts, he has Nala. This is a pretty standard warball mount, giving him lots more speed and charge bonus alongside the larger hitbox. This all makes him better at going on the flanks to take out key backlines targets like missile troops or enemy casters and other support heroes. The larger size does mean his frontlines use is a lot more dangerous, so if you want to make the most of his abilities, it might be worth giving this a miss. Our new generic lore type is the Savage Orc Great Shaman. Obviously, these are very similar to Wurzag with the same lore of the Big War and reliance on Savage Orc physical resistance. They drop all armor, so are extremely vulnerable to all damage, especially magical, making them a lot harder to keep alive if you decide to send them into melee. Their attack is okay, but their damage isn't armor piercing, so I'd stick with lower tier units or just avoid combat altogether and focus on their spells. With their abilities, this is absolutely the way to go, as not only can they provide that powerful spell support, they also increase the physical resistance of all nearby allies and can sacrifice their own movement to increase allied attack and damage. This works great with anything, but no doubt is best suited for a full Savage Orc army to stack resistance as high as possible. For their mounts, they have the War Boar, again, standard mount, so more speed, charge bonus, and some armor. I'd still stick to the backlines as there isn't a huge damage or toughness increase, so just use that extra speed to get spells and buffs wherever needed. And the Wyvern, of course, gains flight, which means a ton of speed alongside much more armor piercing and poison damage. They're now a reasonably strong flying monster that can get anywhere to attack almost anything. Still, be wary of ranged focused or getting pinned down in melee, as the increased size doesn't help their survivability. Coming now to the heroes, first up the legendary hero, Snaggler Grobspit. He's most similar to a goblin big boss on a giant spider with some nice stat boosts. At high speed, it makes him great for flanking around enemy lines to take on key targets like casters and other weaker lords and heroes. Those high melee stats and poison damage will make short work of most he comes against as long as they aren't too armoured. Add on his Stalk, Strider and Vanguard deployments, and he's a devastating ambush attacker that will rarely be seen coming. His abilities allow him to pin down target units, allowing him to move in for the kill without running for help, as well as summoning spider hatchlings either for support or just to give him cover to slip away. Our new generic hero type is the Night Goblin Big Boss. Of course, these are pretty much weaker Night Goblin war bosses with some slightly worse stats across the board. Right out of the box, they're not the best battlers with low melee stats and non-armor piercing damage, so we'll want to focus on lower tier troops and use their poison damage for support rather than carrying anything. Their squig thinking allows them to spawn squig herds for extra damage and support, and empowering shrooms removes rampage and gives squigs a massive attack boost, making them work great alongside a squig heavy army. Their mounts, they can get on a great cave squig, which gives them a nice speed, armor and charge bonus boost alongside a better armor piercing ratio. They're still not carries by any means, but they're a lot better and can charge in with allied squigs for some extra damage and easy ability usage. Coming now to the melee infantry, first up we have the goblins, and the OG goblins have now been changed to goblin spears. Honestly, they're the new bottom of the barrel infantry units for the Greenskins. They have worse defense than goblin spears, but slightly better attack and weapon strength. They also lose charge reflect and defense versus large, and that's really why they're worse. They simply won't hold the line as long, and that's really what goblins are used for. The damage increase won't make them any better in combat, it'll just mean they die faster. If you play in Scarstick, then maybe you can force them into something useful, but as is, they're the bottom of the barrel. Next up, Spear Orc Boys. These are a bit of a boring unit, but that doesn't mean they're not good. They drop a decent chunk of attack from regular boys, but gain some defense alongside charge reflection and defense, making them into much better of a line holder. Honestly, neither version of Orc Boys is going to carry your battles, so better defense is the way to go to make them better at holding the line long enough for support to arrive. Like I said, they may not be exciting, but they'll fill the line holder job really well, and you can't complain about that. And lastly, we have Black Orcs, and again, OG Black Orcs are now great weapons. Once again, they may not be the most exciting, but that doesn't mean they aren't strong. Compared to regular Black Orcs, they have a little less attack, but a lot less armor piercing damage. In exchange, they gain a healthy chunk of defense, some shields, and the ability to drop their attack even further for some truly massive defense stats. These are one of the most absurd line holder units in the game, as once the ability is turned on, they can hold even the most elite damage dealers in place for a very long time. Of course, this means they need to rely on other units for all the damage, but when you can hold enemies still for this long, you don't really need to rush to deal damage anyways. Again, pretty boring to use as they just sit there, but they sit there for such a long time and are so immovable that their utility is undeniable. Next up, monsters and beasts, and first we have the Mangler Squigs. Finally, something exciting even if they are utterly insane. Aside from having some of the wackiest animations of any units in the game so far, they're also an incredibly devastating flank unit. Their high speed and charge bonus combined with some very high armor piercing anti-infantry damage makes them obliterate whatever they clash into once they make their move. Their attack stats aren't the greatest, so cycle charging is the way to go for optimal damage and safety, but they are still extremely devastating whenever they get close to combat. And as a little bonus, if an entity does die, it'll explode for even more damage to whatever's nearby. Next we have the Colossal Squig, going from a bunch of insane squigs to just one big chonker. Aside from its girth, this thing sees even more speed, charge bonus and weapon strength than the Manglers. It's still lacking in the defense department, so cycle charging would be the safest way to deal most damage, but with that attack and damage, it'll do pretty well as a standard frontlines monster, as long as it's embedded in something to keep it safe, maybe those Black Orcs. If it does manage to get taken out, it'll explode for one last bit of damage to the units around it, so if you're going to lose it anyway, bury it as deep in the most expensive units you can find as you can. And our last monster is the Flinger Arachnarok Spider. We're working with the exact same base as the regular Arachnarok Spider, so that means a strong melee monster with high damage to pretty much anything whilst being a wee bit of a big target for enemy range. However, we're swapping those constantly firing goblins with pointy sticks for an explosive, armor-piercing and slowing catapult. This makes it into a very mobile artillery piece that can deal some respectable damage from a huge range. We're also talking a curved firing arc, so firing over your unit's heads is no problem, meaning not much can hide from this. Of course, it can defend itself and then some in melee, but try to use all that ammo first to keep it fresh and healthy, alongside getting off a ton of free damage. And lastly, we have the one and only artillery piece, the Goblin Bolt Thrower. Very similar to most bolt thrower units from other factions like the Dwarves. This particular unit is on the lower end of range but the higher end of damage, making it take a little longer to come online but hit a little bit harder once it does. That armor piercing anti-large damage makes it best used versus huge single entities that aren't moving that much, where all their damage is focused in one spot. Other monsters are also good targets but just a little bit harder to hit from such long ranges until they're stuck in combat, where you also need to worry about firing arcs. No bolt throw unit is out of this world, and this isn't too different. It's a decent early game artillery piece for taking out those early monsters, but will be quickly replaced later on. And lastly, we have the Regiments of Renown. We have Rugland's Armoured Orcs, the Acid Burper, and Snaggler's Death Thrower. And that is all we have for the new Greenskin units, but keep an eye out for the rework videos coming out on Friday. Like, subscribe, and if you want more Omens of Destruction videos, then check out this one on the new Khorne roster.